Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Minash. On today's show, we're talking about the recently announced purchase of Remax. But first, today's show is sponsored by the Cost Segregation Guys. If you own investment real estate and haven't looked seriously at cost segregation, you could be leaving significant tax savings on the table. The Cost Segregation Guys help investors accelerate depreciation, improve near-term cash flow, and make more efficient use of capital, all without changing the underlying asset. In a business where preserving cash matters, that's worth paying attention to. And if you're interested in learning more, click on the link in the show notes and we'll connect you directly with the Cost Segregation Guys, where you will qualify for a discount because you came from the show. On today's show, we're looking at a major headline in the brokerage world, the acquisition of Remax for about $880 million, but more importantly, what it means not just for agents and shareholders, but for residential clients and real estate investors. Because transactions like this are not about logos or brand names, it's about control of distribution, customer relationships, ultimately margins. Let's start with the big picture. When you have consolidation in brokerages, the percentage of double-ended transactions, or what is often called dual representation, goes way up. That means the brokerage makes double the money for the same transaction. So the buyer is not really buying real estate, they're buying a network of agents, of listings, of client relationships, and most importantly, transaction flow. In some ways, it's like acquiring infrastructure. If you control the pipeline through which deals flow, you have leverage, and leverage, used correctly, translates into pricing power and also efficiency. So the question is, who benefits from that pricing power? Let's break it down into two groups, residential clients and investors. For the average home buyer, this type of acquisition shows up in subtle ways at first. You might see it as increased standardization, more centralized systems, more consistent client experience across markets. That's the optimistic case. But there is another side to this. When ownership consolidates, there's often pressure to improve margins, and that can come from cost reductions or from increased fees. So the real question is whether this leads to better service at the same price, or the same service at a higher price, or maybe no change and it's just better margins for the brokerage. Historically, consolidation tends to favor efficiency over personalization. You might get faster response time, better digital tools, more data-driven insights, but you may also lose some of the local nuance that independent operators bring to the table. Real estate is hyperlocal. Pricing a home correctly requires an understanding of micro-markets, not just macro trends. If decision-making becomes too centralized, there's a risk that local expertise gets diluted. So for clients, it means you need to be more selective. Don't assume that a brand guarantees performance. That individual agent still matters. Now let's shift to investors, because this is where the implications become more strategic. As an investor, you're not just a consumer of brokerage services. You're a repeat buyer. You're a repeat seller, sometimes a provider of deal flow. There are still a ton of investors in the residential 1 to 4 space. Yes, the commercial clients are going to be using the major commercial brokerages, the CBREs, Colliers, Marcus & Millichap, JLL, and many others. But there's a ton of investors out there that still use real estate brokers that tend to be a little bit more residentially focused, like Keller Williams, like Remax, like EXP. So the industry is consolidating. And when industries consolidate, two things happen. First, the barrier to entry increases. It becomes harder for smaller independent brokerages to compete on technology, on marketing, and reach. And second, the surviving players definitely become more sophisticated. They invest in data. They invest in predictive analytics. They start to understand not just where the deals are happening, but where they will happen. And that has implications for deal sourcing. If you're relying on MLS-listed properties as your primary pipeline, you're already late to the game. And with more sophisticated brokerage networks, that lag becomes even more pronounced. The best deals are often identified before they even hit the market. So as an investor, you have to ask yourself, what is your relationship to the deal flow? Are you dependent on it, or are you embedded within it? That's a big difference. If you're dependent, you're competing with everyone else. But if you're embedded, meaning you have relationships with brokers, with agents, developers, property owners, then you're part of the ecosystem that generates those opportunities. Transactions like this reinforce the importance of those relationships, because when the corporate entity may change, real estate is still a relationship business at its core. So there's a few ways you can respond to that as an investor. First is to deepen relationships within your brokerage network, not at the brand level, but at the individual level. The top performing agents are the ones who consistently close deals. They're your gateway to off-market opportunities. And the second is to diversify your sourcing channels. Don't rely solely on brokers. Build direct-to-owner channels. develop partnerships with developers, engage in community-level intelligence gathering, and then recognize that brokerage consolidation might compress margins on transactions. If fees increase or competition intensifies, your underwriting should reflect that. Assume slightly higher transaction costs. Assume slightly more competition for quality assets, and make sure your deals still work under those conditions. Now, I have not personally analyzed this deal in great detail. I'm frankly a little bit surprised at the size of the acquisition at $880 million for a network the size of Remax. That feels like a low number, but I could be wrong. Regardless, it's a signal. It's a signal that the brokerage industry is evolving. It is becoming more centralized, more data-driven, and more competitive. For residential clients, it means being more discerning on who you work with, and for investors, it means being more intentional on how you source deals and build relationships. Because in a consolidating market, the advantage goes to those who are closest to the flow of information. And that's where you want to be. As you think about that, have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen. And we'll talk to you again tomorrow.